Imagine you're driving alone at night. Florida. A long, empty road. The kind where the headlights barely cut through the darkness, and the trees on either side look like walls closing in. You see a woman walking the shoulder of the road. She looks stranded, cold, maybe scared. You pull over, because you're a decent person, and that's the last decision you ever make. This is the story of Aileen Wuornos. And before we go any further, you need to understand one thing. This isn't a story about a monster hiding in the shadows. This is a story about a woman who operated in plain sight. On highways, in cars, in the middle of the day, and nobody saw it coming. Not until the bodies started appearing. Let's go back to the beginning. Because to understand what Aileen Wuornos did, you first have to understand what was done to her. She was born in Michigan in 1956. Her father, a convicted child molester, was already in prison when she came into the world. She never met him. He died in a prison cell years later. Her mother abandoned her and her brother when Aileen was 4 years old. 4 years old, left with her grandparents. People who, according to Aileen, were not warm, not loving, and in her grandfather's case, reportedly violent and abusive in ways that don't need graphic detail here for you to understand just how devastating that was. By the time she was 11, she was reportedly exchanging sexual favors with older boys and men in the neighborhood for food, for cigarettes, for somewhere to sleep. She was 11. At 13, she became pregnant. The child was given up for adoption. At 15, her grandmother died. Her grandfather kicked her out. And this is where the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Because every single institution that was supposed to catch her, family, school, social services, let her fall straight through. Aileen Wuornos, 15 years old, was officially on her own. She dropped out of school. She started living in the woods near her old neighborhood. She survived by doing what she had always been forced to do. Sex work. On the roads. In the cars. With strangers. And here's what's important to understand about this part of her life. It wasn't a choice in any meaningful sense of the word. It was survival. She had no home, no education, no support system, no safety net of any kind. She was a child who had been handed absolutely nothing and told to figure it out. And somehow she kept going. For decades, she hitchhiked across the country, drifted through multiple states, got arrested multiple times for assault, armed robbery, disorderly conduct. Small crimes, street crimes, the kind of charges that pile up when you've been living on the margins of society for 20 years. She wasn't invisible. She left a trail of records behind her. And still, nobody helped. By the late 1980s, she was living in Florida. She was in her early 30s. And she had met a woman named Tyria Moore. Tyria was younger. They met at a bar in Daytona Beach in 1986. They became a couple. And for the first time in Aileen Wuornos' life, she had something that looked like stability. They moved around, staying in cheap motels, getting by however they could. Aileen was still working the highways, still meeting strangers in cars. And this is where the story shifts. Because in 1989, something changed. What exactly changed, and why, became the central question of one of the most debated criminal cases in American history. November 30th, 1989. Richard Mallory, a 51-year-old electronics store owner from Clearwater, Florida. He left his shop one evening. He never came back. His car was found abandoned. His belongings were missing. His body was found in the woods near Volusia County. He had been shot multiple times with a .22 caliber pistol. Investigators noted the scene carefully, filed it away, moved on. And now, this is no longer random. Then, in May of 1990, another body. David Spears, 43 years old, found in a remote part of Citrus County, shot multiple times. Same caliber weapon. His truck was missing. His belongings were gone. 1 month later, Charles Carskaddon, 40 years old, found in Pasco County, shot 9 times with a .22. His belongings gone. 7 victims. Same weapon. Same type of target. Same vanishing act afterward. Yeah, this isn't a coincidence anymore. And here's where investigators start to notice a pattern that doesn't match anything in their playbook. Because serial killers, in almost every case the FBI has studied, follow a profile. They're almost always male. They almost always target women or vulnerable victims. They almost always have a specific, personal motivation tied to power, control, or fantasy. What investigators were looking at here broke every single one of those rules. The victims were all men, all middle-aged, all found near highways or rural roads, all shot with the same type of weapon. And in every case, their money, their cars, their belongings were taken. This looked, at first glance, like robbery. But the escalating number of victims in such a short time told investigators this was something more systematic, something more deliberate. And this changes everything. Because they weren't just hunting a killer. They were hunting a profile that had never existed before. They just didn't know who yet. By September 1990, 3 more men had been killed in the same pattern. Troy Burress, a sausage delivery man, 50 years old. Dick Humphreys, a retired police chief, 56 years old.
The files
Walter
on the case
Antonio,
are incomplete.
a truck
You
driver,
were the chief.
60
What are you
years
hiding?
old.
I have
7
nothing
men,
more to say.
7 months. Same weapon, same type of victim, same disappearing act. Law enforcement from multiple Florida counties had finally begun coordinating, and they started working backward from the evidence. The victims' cars, some had been found, and in those cars, and at some of the scenes, investigators were pulling fingerprints. The same prints, over and over. Then came the break. In January 1991, 2 women attempted to pawn several items in Volusia County, items that had belonged to Richard Mallory. A pawnshop camera captured their images. Police ran the prints against their database. One match came back to a woman with multiple prior arrests. The name on the record, Lori Grody. An alias. The real name, Aileen Wuornos. She was arrested on January 9, 1991, at a biker bar called The Last Resort in Port Orange, Florida. She didn't run. She didn't fight. She was just there, like she'd been waiting. Which, when you understand everything that comes next, almost makes sense. What happened after the arrest became as controversial as the crimes themselves. Because investigators needed a confession. And to get it, they did something that still draws criticism to this day.
Where were you on the night
They
of the
approached
15th?
Tyria Moore,
I told you
Eileen's
I was
partner,
at home.
the
We have a
person she
witness.
loved most in the world. And they made her a deal. Tyria would not be charged with any crime in exchange for her cooperation. What that cooperation looked like was a series of phone calls. Recorded phone calls. Tyria, under the direction of law enforcement, called Aileen in jail. She told her she was scared, that she was going to get in trouble, that she needed Aileen to take responsibility so that she could be safe. Aileen Wuornos, who had spent her entire life protecting herself by trusting no one, broke down for the one person she trusted completely. She confessed, not once, multiple times. In detail, she confirmed she had killed 7 men. And she said the same thing every single time. Self-defense. She told
Your Honor,
investigators,
I insist on my
told
7
courts,
points.
told
1, 2,
cameras,
3, 4,
told
5,
anyone
6,
who would
7.
listen, that these men had attacked her first, that they had tried to rape her, that she had a gun because she had been brutally assaulted before, because she worked alone, in cars, with strangers, at night, for 20 years, and she knew exactly how dangerous that was. She said she fired in self-defense. Every time. Here's where this case becomes genuinely complicated. Because in the case of her first victim, Richard Mallory, investigators later discovered something that had not come out at trial. Richard Mallory had a prior conviction for violent sexual assault. He had served 10 years in prison for it. That information was not presented to the jury during Eileen's trial. Her defense attorneys didn't have it. The prosecution didn't disclose it. And whether that information would have changed anything, we will never know. Because by the time it came out, Aileen had already been convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. She was tried 6 times, convicted each time. And somewhere along the way, something shifted inside her. She stopped claiming self-defense. She started saying the opposite. In later interviews, she told journalists she had lied, that she had not been attacked, that she had planned the killings. Then in other interviews, she walked that back, said she was manipulated, confused, that the system had ground her down until she didn't know what was true anymore. Psychologists who examined her documented severe trauma, borderline personality disorder, and psychological damage consistent, in their words, with a lifetime of abuse and exploitation. By this point, there's no version of this story that ends well. Not for the victims. Not for their families.
These are my final
not
words.
for her. On October
I have
9,
nothing left to say.
2002, Aileen Wuornos was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison. She was 46 years old. Her last words, in part, "I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus June 6th. Like the movie, Big Mothership and all. Reporters described her as calm, almost relieved. Here's what this case leaves behind. Not a clean answer. Not a tidy moral. What it leaves is a question the American criminal justice system still hasn't figured out how to answer. When someone has been failed systematically from childhood by every institution meant to protect them, when they are left to survive in conditions that virtually guarantee violence, when the harm they eventually cause is entangled with the harm done to them. What does justice even mean? Was Aileen Wuornos a predatory serial killer? The court said yes, 7 times. Was she also a victim of abuse, exploitation, and a system that failed her at every turn from birth? The evidence says yes to that too. Both of those things can be true at the same time. The men she killed had families. They lost their lives. That is real, and it matters, and it cannot be erased. And Aileen Wuornos had a life that reads like a case study in what happens when society completely abandons a human being and then acts shocked at what that person becomes. There's no version of this story where everyone is wrong and no one is right. There's just a highway in Florida, a series of choices made by broken people in impossible circumstances, and a case that still, more than 30 years later, has no satisfying resolution. So I'll ask you what I genuinely want to know. Do you think Aileen Wuornos was a killer, a victim, or something far more complicated than either of those words can hold? Leave it in the comments. Because this is exactly the kind of conversation that needs more than one voice.